Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to talk on this issue today. It is an issue that affects not just us in the Assembly, but many of our constituents. This morning we heard from the Minister for Women in her ministerial statement about the work being done and that remains to be done to allow women to aspire to equality. In our case, on our side, we focus particularly on equality of opportunity, and it will be remiss of me not to point out at this point that we're now the first Liberal Party room in Australia with a majority of women members. We've achieved this together through encouraging women, removing any disadvantages those women may face in getting pre-selected and elected, and our party members, our Women's Council and our MLAs have all worked together to encourage equality and opportunity for women, and to see many of these elected is now a fantastic result for us. And of course this has all been achieved without any heavy-handed or patronising approaches to force party members to fill targets. It's a credit to every Liberal Party member. What we find now is that we're reflecting the views of our community, as we always have here on merit, whether it's through gender balance, diversity of background, culture, religion, etc. We talk a lot about gender in this place, and there is a need for a compassionate and fair approach in response to this. It is important to pass, if you like, the gender lens across many areas of government policy and legislation, because we know, for example, that in the ACT there are 240 victims per 100,000 persons from the 2015-16 year, which was an increase of 33%. Women were 3 times more likely to suffer violence at the hands of an intimate partner than men in the ACT, according to a report in the Canberra Times of June 2017. Compared with their peers, women with disability experience significantly higher levels of all forms of violence, and they're subjected to violence by a greater number of perpetrators. Women with disability are 40% more likely to be a victim of domestic violence than women without disability. 20% of women with disabilities report a history of unwanted sex, compared to 8.2% of women without disabilities. More than a quarter of rape cases reported by females in Australia are perpetrated against women with disabilities, and 90% of Australian women with an intellectual disability have been subjected to sexual abuse, with more than 2/3 having been sexually abused before they turned 18 years of age. This is a fact sheet prepared by Women with Disabilities Australia about violence against women with disabilities. So that's just one example to start with of where women bear a disproportionate brunt of instances of violence in our community. Violence is not appropriate in any situation, but to be perpetrated against women with disabilities seems even worse for some reason. Another area where it's important to pass the gender lens over policy and legislation is in relation to housing and homelessness. We know that 34% of single women over the age of 60 live in permanent income poverty. And by the age of 65, women retire with about 1/3 of the superannuation that men accumulate. It is a problem that's been facing us for centuries, that women are generally lower paid, if they are paid at all for their labour, that they have fewer assets, and they have less superannuation in more modern times. And the dire financial situation of older women is well documented and well established. Financial and economic insecurity, combining with a lack of affordable housing, something we hear about a lot here in the ACT, increases the housing risks for older single women. as they're teetering on the brink of this financial insecurity and this structural vulnerability, another event in their life, such as a relationship breakdown, job loss, or change in their health circumstances, or the death of a partner, can be all it takes for an older single woman to become homeless. Once they become homeless, there is very few exits for them from that predicament. According to the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, one of the most disadvantaged demographic profiles for a person to have is to be old, single, poor, female, and in private rental accommodation. Of course, it's not only about older women. For young women, we've heard studies at universities. For example, the 2017 National Report on Sexual Assault and Sexual Harassment at Australian Universities, which found that 21% of students were sexually harassed in a university setting in 2016. Women are 3 times more likely than men to have been sexually assaulted in a university setting. And the University of Canberra had 5 assaults on campus in 2015 and 16. The ANU had 52 sexual assaults in 2015 and 16. We know from community surveys here in the ACT and Australia and worldwide about the way women feel about safety in public places, especially at night. For example, the National Survey of Community Satisfaction with Policing revealed that 62.5% of women do not feel safe while alone, walking or jogging in their neighbourhood during the night. This is pretty worrying, and we need to get the government to address what practical steps can be taken to address this, whether it's better street lighting, CCTV, addressing blind spots, police presence, derelict buildings, etc. This is something that I know I've raised with the Minister in the past. For example, a question on notice in September last year, I think, where I asked the Minister for Transport and City Services about lighting behind the CIT in Tuggeranong, a newly opened CIT in Tuggeranong. And I had reports from locals as well as from the Tuggeranong Community Council about their fears about a lack of additional lighting in the car park behind that building. This was not long after the report about sexual assault at universities had come out. So this is an area where there is still much to do. It's important to look at many, many issues from the perspective of gender. And I know my colleague Mrs Jones has put a lot of focus on this in her work. She's looked at the lack of accommodation and work programs for women in the AMC. She's forced the government to address the topic of breastfeeding rooms in public sector workforces. She's forced the government to look at the needs of women firefighters with respect to having portaloos on site, and also talk about the small number of women who are employed in the fire brigade. So there are many things that are yet to be done. It's sometimes difficult to meet the needs of everyone. There is the emerging politics or agenda of gender, which is rising in popularity, and there's a need, absolutely, for a compassionate and fair response for people dealing with diverse gender identity. And one of the things that I've thought about quite a bit was the case of a female AFL player who sought to play in the Women's League and was not given permission. Yeah, so it's a really interesting case, and many pros and cons from both those people involved in football, in women's football, and those who are keen followers of the sport, as well as various other stakeholders. It's not an easy topic, but it's something that we all need to think about and address in a compassionate and logical way. It seems sometimes that compassion and logic don't always go hand in hand. But the struggle of centuries, which has been so important for women and men about the economic, social and personal well-being of women, is something that I think we here in this place all agree on, and we'll all be trying to work to progress that well-being for everyone, men, women and people from a diverse gender.
A matter of public importance, Ms Berry.
Thank you.